I never expected my dog to save a life that day. It was a regular evening, just like any other. The sky had begun to turn a soft orange as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Max, my loyal German shepherd, was always full of energy, wagging his tail as we went on our nightly walk around the backyard. But today, he was acting different. At first, I thought nothing of it. He had stopped at the same patch of dirt he'd passed over countless times before. But then, his digging grew more intense, frantic even. He wasn't just digging for a bone or a toy like usual. There was something urgent in his movements. "Max," I called, frowning. "What are you up to now?" He ignored me, his paws digging deeper into the earth, the soil flying in all directions. His usual happy demeanor had shifted to something more serious, more focused. As I walked closer, I felt a strange chill in the air. There was a heaviness in the moment that I couldn't shake. The sun, once warm and bright, now seemed to cast a dim, almost eerie light over everything. I reached down to pull him away, thinking he'd just found a rat or another creature to entertain himself with. But as I brushed aside the dirt, I froze. There, lying underneath the layers of soil, was a tiny, lifeless body, a small puppy, barely breathing. My heart stopped as I crouched down to take a closer look. Max had found a puppy, but this wasn't any ordinary find. The puppy was barely alive, its tiny chest rising and falling, with slow, shallow breaths. Its body was covered in dirt, its fur matted and stained, and it was so frail that I thought for a second it might be too late. But the worst part, it had been buried alive. Someone had buried this puppy, left it in the dirt, abandoned to die. I stared at the small creature in shock. Max stood by my side, his eyes wide and focused, his usually happy face now marked with concern. I could feel my pulse quicken, a wave of panic crashing over me. How could anyone do something like this? How could someone so heartlessly bury a living being? Without thinking, I scooped the puppy up in my arms, Max instinctively following close behind me, his gaze never leaving the tiny body I cradled against my chest. The puppy was so fragile, so weak, and I knew that time was running out. Every second counted. I needed to get it help. "Come on, Max," I whispered urgently. "We need to get to the vet." Max didn't hesitate. He trotted right beside me, his focus unwavering. We had to save this puppy. There was no time to lose. The world seemed to fall away as I ran toward the house. The air felt heavy, the weight of what had just happened pressing on my chest. Who could have done this? Who would leave a helpless puppy to die in a hole in the ground? Max had uncovered a buried soul, one that was struggling to hold on to life, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. The moment we stepped through the door, I felt an overwhelming rush of panic and urgency. The puppy was so small, its body so limp in my arms, that I feared each breath it took would be its last. Max, usually so playful, seemed more subdued now, his eyes wide with a silent understanding that this wasn't just any ordinary day, was a life-or-death situation. I had no time to waste. I grabbed my keys, my hands shaking as I fumbled with them, and rushed to the car. Max jumped into the back seat without a word, his eyes never leaving the puppy as I carefully placed it on the passenger seat. I knew I couldn't waste a second. The vet was miles away, and with every passing moment, the chance of the puppy surviving was slipping away. "Stay with me," I whispered, glancing over at the puppy, whose tiny body shuddered with each labored breath. I could feel Max's gaze on it, and I swear, it was as if he knew what was at stake. The silence in the car was deafening, the weight of what had happened crushing down on us. I had no answers, no explanations for why someone would do something so cruel. But I had one goal now, to get this puppy to safety. As I sped down the road, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, glancing at Max to make sure he was okay, but mostly to reassure myself. His normally carefree attitude was gone. He was serious now, his usual exuberance replaced by a quiet intensity. Max's presence was oddly calming. He seemed to be focused on the puppy, like he knew something that I didn't. Like he understood the gravity of the situation better than I could comprehend. We reached the clinic in what felt like an eternity. But it had only been 20 minutes. I rushed into the vet's office, my heart pounding, holding the puppy close to my chest, as if I could somehow protect it with my own warmth. The staff at the clinic were quick to respond, ushering me into the back room, where a vet tech gently took the puppy from my arms. "Don't worry," the vet tech said softly, her face full of concern as she rushed around, setting up the examination table. "We'll do everything we can." But I could feel the doubt gnawing at me. The puppy had been buried in the dirt. It had been left for dead. How could it survive this? It was so small, so fragile. My mind kept flashing back to that horrifying moment, in the yard, when I'd uncovered it, barely breathing, gasping for air. Max, who had been quietly following us into the clinic, stood by the door, his eyes fixed on the puppy. He never left its side, his presence oddly reassuring. I could see the bond between them forming even in this brief moment. He had saved this puppy, uncovered it from the earth as though guided by some unseen force. It was as if he knew it was his job to make sure this small life survived. The vet finally arrived, a tall man in his late 30s, with a calm demeanor. His steady hands moved quickly as he examined the puppy, placing it on the table and checking for signs of any serious injuries, but the only thing that stood out was its extreme weakness and dehydration. The vet murmured something under his breath about how lucky the puppy was to have been found when it was. If we had been even a few minutes later, he said, the puppy might not have made it. We'll need to hydrate it and get it stable, he said, his voice steady, but I could hear the underlying concern. But it's going to be a long road. We don't know what kind of trauma it's been through. I nodded, my stomach in knots, my mind reeling from the weight of what had happened. The vet wasn't giving false hope, he was being honest. There were no guarantees. But as he set to work, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The puppy was alive. It had a heartbeat. It was still breathing. Max stood by the table, watching with rapt attention, as if waiting for the next move. It was strange, almost surreal, how this dog, this loyal companion of mine, had been the one to uncover this fragile life. How had Max known to dig so desperately in that exact spot? Why had he chosen to dig at all, instead of continuing with his usual antics? Was it just a random act? Or had something more significant been at play? I shook the thought away. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Max had saved that puppy. If he hadn't acted when he did, the puppy would have been lost forever, buried beneath the dirt. Its chances of survival slim to none. The vet worked quickly, placing Anfor to hydrate the puppy and giving it some medication to stabilize its heart rate. As the minutes passed, I could feel my tension start to ease. The puppy was still alive. It was still holding on. I turned to Max, who had now moved to the edge of the examination room. His eyes met mine, and for a split second, I felt an unspoken connection between us. It was as if Max knew what I was thinking, that this puppy's life had been spared for a reason, that somehow, this was just the beginning of its second chance. The vet finished his initial assessments and looked at me. It's not out of the woods yet, he said gently, but we're doing everything we can. I think it's strong enough to pull through, but we'll need to monitor it closely over the next few days. I nodded, my heart swelling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. I had no idea how this had happened, why someone would abandon such a defenseless creature. But I did know one thing: I wasn't going to let this puppy slip away. It was getting a second chance at life, and I would do everything in my power to make sure it had the chance it deserved. Max sat down quietly in the corner of the room, his eyes still fixed on the puppy. His tail was still, but his expression was calm. He had done his part. Now, it was time for me to do mine. But something lingered in my mind. How had Max known? How had he found this puppy, buried and alone in the dirt, when no one else could? There was something more to this story, something that went beyond chance. The next few days passed in a blur. My mind was consumed by the tiny puppy fighting for its life in the sterile white walls of the vet's office. Max seemed more restless than usual, his every moment spent pacing by the door, his eyes never straying too far from the small bed where the puppy lay. It was as though he couldn't leave its side, as if there was a silent promise in his gaze that he would protect it, no matter what. The puppy, still fragile and weak, was slowly improving under the vet's care. It had been a harrowing few days of uncertainty. Every time I went to check on it, I held my breath, praying to see any sign of improvement. The first time I saw the puppy open its eyes, I couldn't hold back the tears. Those small, dark eyes, filled with confusion and fear, locked onto mine. It was a moment I would never forget. The moment I knew the puppy was going to survive. Max, ever watchful, had begun to relax. Though his attention was never fully diverted from the tiny creature in the corner of the room, it seemed as if they shared an unspoken bond, one that had formed in the dirt beneath that cold, unfeeling earth. Perhaps Max understood more than I did. Perhaps he knew that this little life, this innocent soul, had been buried for too long, and needed a protector. Each day, I would visit the vet's office, checking in on the puppy, making sure it was okay. I'd sit by the bed, stroking its tiny, matted fur, whispering words of encouragement. The vet had told me that the puppy was incredibly lucky to have survived the trauma it had been through. It wasn't just the physical damage from being buried, it was the emotional toll, the fear, the abandonment, the loneliness. All of that was part of its healing process. The puppy was slowly gaining strength. It began to feed on its own, its tiny body filling out a little more each day. It was still fragile, still in need of constant care, but the progress was undeniable. The first time it managed to stand on its own, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. There was hope. There was a chance for this puppy to have a life, one that was filled with love and safety. But the vet had warned me that the emotional scars would take much longer to heal, and I had to wonder, would the puppy ever fully trust again? Would it be able to let go of the fear of being abandoned? I didn't have the answers, but I knew that I wasn't going to give up on it. I had promised it a better life, and I would keep that promise. Max had already taken on a protective role, often lying next to the puppy's bed, his head resting gently on the edge, his body tense, ready to spring into action if anything were to happen. It was clear that he had formed a bond with the tiny creature. The puppy, still so young, had become part of Max's world, and Max had made it his mission to ensure that it would be safe. It was as if the dog understood that the puppy needed him just as much as it needed me. Each day the puppy became a little more energetic. It started to move around, its wobbly steps growing more stable with each passing hour. The sight of the puppy stretching its tiny legs, trying to walk, was a moment of triumph. It was a small victory in a long journey, but to me, it felt monumental. This puppy was alive, and it was fighting. It wasn't ready to give up, not when it had come this far. Max's role in all of this was not lost on me. The way he watched over the puppy, his protective instincts taking over, made me realize that there was something more profound happening. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about healing a soul that had been left to die in the cold, abandoned, and forgotten. But now, that puppy was part of our family. Part of the bond that had formed between Max, the dog who had uncovered it, and myself, the human who had promised to protect it. I spent every waking moment tending to the puppy. It was a constant effort to keep it comfortable, to make sure it was getting stronger. I would stay up late into the night, checking on it, adjusting the blankets, feeding it, and just talking to it. I didn't know if it could understand me, but I spoke to it anyway. I told it that everything was going to be okay, that it was safe now, that it was loved. It was my promise to this little soul, this fragile creature who had been given a second chance, and I was determined to help it find its place in this world. Max was by my side, as always, offering his silent support. He seemed to sense my every worry, every fear, and he was there, offering his presence as a reminder that we weren't in this alone. Together, we were giving this puppy the best chance it had, and I would be damned if anyone, or anything, was going to take that away. The puppy had a long road ahead. It had a lot of healing to do, both physically and emotionally. But I knew that with Max's protection, and with my unwavering dedication, it would overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. It wasn't just about saving a puppy, it was about giving it a future filled with love, safety, and the promise of never being alone again. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, the puppy's transformation became more miraculous. What had once been a small, fragile creature on the brink of death was now a living testament to the power of love, protection, and second chances. It still had its scars, emotional and physical, but it was no longer the scared, trembling puppy I had first found. Now, it was learning to trust, to live, and most importantly, to love. Max had become the puppy's guardian. I saw him guiding the little one with a kind of patience that was beyond words. Every time the puppy stumbled or hesitated, Max was there, nudging it gently, urging it to try again. He was teaching it the unspoken language of love and loyalty, showing it how to be brave in a world that had shown it nothing but cruelty. The bond between them was growing stronger every day, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how quickly they had connected. The puppy's healing was not just physical, it was emotional, too. Each day, I saw it open up a little more. The fearful eyes that had once looked at me with distrust were now filled with curiosity and hope. The hesitation in its movements had turned into a playful energy, and it was learning to wag its tiny tail in excitement. It was starting to look like a happy, healthy puppy again. But the road to full recovery wasn't without its challenges. The vet had warned me that the puppy might carry the trauma of its abandonment for a long time. Trust was something that had to be earned, not given freely. And I knew I would have to be patient. The first time the puppy cuddled up to me, seeking warmth and comfort, I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. I had been the one to promise this little creature safety, but it was this puppy who had given me so much more in return. The trust it had placed in me, the connection it had formed with Max, was a gift I would never take for granted. I had given this puppy a second chance at life, but in doing so, it had given me a new sense of purpose. It reminded me of the power of compassion, of how the simplest acts of kindness could change a life forever. There were moments of doubt, of course. Moments when I wondered if I was doing enough, if I could truly help this puppy heal. But then I'd see it play, hear its happy barks, or watch as it nuzzled up to Max, and I would know that I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. The healing was slow, but it was happening. With every step forward, the puppy was gaining more confidence. It was becoming the dog it was always meant to be. And nothing could stop it now. Max had taken it upon himself to be the puppy's protector, but he also played a role in its growth. They played together in the yard, running and tumbling in the grass. It was a sight that brought tears to my eyes. The joy in the puppy's eyes, the way it trusted Max to lead the way, was proof that love had the power to overcome even the deepest wounds. I couldn't help but think that Max had known something I didn't when he uncovered the puppy that day. Maybe he had sensed the puppy's need for a family, for safety, for love, and somehow, he had led me to it. The more I watched Max and the puppy together, the more I realized how deeply they had bonded. It wasn't just a matter of protection, it was a matter of connection. Max had become a part of the puppy's story, just as the puppy had become part of his. They had both been through their own battles, but now, they were fighting them together. I knew that their journey was far from over, but I also knew that they had already come so far as the weeks passed. The puppy grew stronger, its body slowly recovering from the physical trauma. But it was the emotional healing that was the most difficult to witness. The moments of fear, the hesitation in its eyes when it was around new people, the nervousness that still lingered, it was all part of the process. I had to remind myself that healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks. There were times when the puppy would regress, when it would tremble at the sound of a loud noise or shy away from strangers. But every time it showed signs of fear, Max was there, offering his unwavering support. It was as though he understood that the puppy's journey was long and complicated, and he was willing to walk with it every step of the way. One afternoon, as I watched Max and the puppy play in the yard, I realized how much had changed. The puppy had become part of our family, and Max had become its protector, its mentor, and its best friend. It was no longer the weak, fragile puppy that had been buried beneath the dirt. It was a fighter, a survivor, and it had a future filled with love, laughter, and companionship. But there was something else. A quiet, unspoken feeling that lingered in the air. Something that told me this wasn't just about saving a puppy. This was about something bigger. It was about the bond between animals and humans. The connection that transcends words. The deep, instinctive understanding that some things are meant to be. Max had saved this puppy, and in doing so, he had taught me something invaluable. Love isn't just about what we give. It's about what we receive. And in this moment, as I watched Max and the puppy together, I knew that I had received far more than I could ever give. The puppy's journey wasn't over, but it had come so far. And I knew, deep in my heart, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, it would always have a family. It would always have a home. It would always have love. And most importantly, it would always have Max.